You know how sometimes a musician will cover an older song and make it better or richer or maybe more emotional? Why, I wish that was true for video games. I would love to see somebody else take a crack at Albacete Warrior, the debut release from first-time developer Foss 3. This is a silly beat-em-up with an extremely cool conceit that is thoroughly let down by an inexperienced team who gets almost every element wrong. Oh, how I wish that somebody else could take a crack at this game, because I'm telling you, there's something really cool hidden away inside of this frustrating game. Let's explore both the good and the bad in this review of Albacete Warrior. This is the story of Benito Waters, an unlikely ninja from Albacete, Spain, who goes on a bizarre, globe-trotting adventure after his dojo is burned to the ground by thugs wearing sombreros and jalapeno pepper costumes. Accompanied by his chicken pal Pepito and the decapitated head of his sensei, this is a satirical ninja game where the storyteller throws pretty much everything they can think of at the wall in hopes of it sticking. Forget the random and irreverent sense of humor for a moment, because the first thing you're going to notice is the very specific art style. You play a 2D pixel sprite that looks like it was pulled straight out of one of those 8-bit Ninja Gaiden games. The paper-thin hero is existing in a large 3D world made up of bad guys and polygonal obstacles. It's this mix of new and old that makes this game really stand out, and I was won over by its potential right from the start. Now, at its core, this is little more than a standard beat-em-up, not unlike Final Fight or Streets of Rage, or really countless other brawlers from the 1990s. We're given a few extremely simple combos, as well as the ability to swing Pepito around, kinda like a whip. Later in the game, we'll unlock more traditional ninja moves, such as unleashing a barrage of throwing stars and a rush attack that stops the enemy dead in its tracks. There's not a lot to the combat, but it gets the job done for at least an hour or two. The problem with Albacete Warrior has little to do with the actual fighting, but rather the way the rest of the game plays out. This is one of those brawlers that insists on also being a platformer, and yeah, that's where things really start to fall apart. There's an especially brutal bit in the second level that's set against a waterfall that feels nearly impossible. It's one of those awful sections where one wrong move will send you falling straight down to the very start of the stage, forcing you to try the precarious jumps over and over and over until you eventually get it right. What makes this especially frustrating is that it's almost impossible to judge how far you're gonna jump. There are times when you'll dismount from a wall jump and fly completely over the platform, while other times Benito will barely jump at all. It doesn't help that there's a second or two delay between pressing the button and actually jumping off of the wall, which makes timing your moves much more difficult than it should be. The gameplay veers wildly between imprecise and feeling too loose, almost as if our hero is constantly slipping on ice. And it's not like these annoying platforming sections lead to something cool, because half the time they're just pointing to another annoying boss battle. Don't get me wrong, it's not that the boss designs are bad, but rather that their attacks are cheap and can kill Benito in a single hit. A lot of these fights end up lasting longer than they probably should, and it's especially frustrating to die from a falling block that you couldn't possibly predict mere seconds before you would have defeated the boss. While not all of them are as challenging as the rest, I didn't like a single boss battle in this entire game. They're all terrible. Unfortunately, I didn't find myself laughing much either. While I can certainly appreciate the absurdity of some of the scenarios, so much of the writing felt like it was forced and obvious. There's a lot of racial humor, weirdly placed profanity, and toothless references to hot-button topics on Twitter. Look, I'm not offended by profanity, and I like edgy jokes, but this is an example of a game trying way too hard. It's not edgy or offensive. The writing is just lame. It's also poorly localized. The dialogue is filled with annoying typos and errors. In fact, there are so many misspellings that I started to wonder if maybe it was being done on purpose. A good example of this is when Benito's sensei says await when he actually means wait. This happens every single time, and it starts to feel like it must be a bit, but it's never funny and isn't tied to anything else related to the dialogue. There are a lot of moments just like that. In the end, the most frustrating thing about Albacete Warrior is that the elements are all here to make a great game. I like the way the 2D sprites exist in this 3D world and how over the top the adventure eventually becomes. With right people involved, this could have been a must-own ninja parody. And as it is, Albacete Warrior is a frustrating mess of a brawler that should be avoided at all cost. Albacete Warrior is an inventive beat-em-up that combines both 2D and 3D elements to craft a unique action game with a biting sense of humor. Unfortunately, the whole thing is completely undone by some absolutely tragic gameplay, frustrating platforming bits, and jokes that are trying harder to be edgy than funny. And it's certainly not the worst ninja game ever made, but Albacete Warrior had the potential to be a lot better than it actually is. Yeah, Ryu Hayabusa would not be impressed. Hey, thanks for watching our review. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new reviews and features almost every day. Now, here's the question I have for you. What game needs to be remade by a different studio? And more specifically, what company should remake the game? You know, that's a really interesting thought experiment, so I'm excited to see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back with a review of Temple of Snack and June Shining, plus a look at GamePro in the early days. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.